32, and at this point I have seen more than my fair share of horror movies. I've seen some great movies that I am always going to want to rewatch. I've seen a lot of like meh movies that I've watched just the once and I have made peace with that. I have seen a bunch of movies that I will never rewatch again for various reasons. And then there's this small collection of movies that I remember watching, but can I tell you anything about them? No. The only thing that I really remember is that I rated them on the scale of to meh. Which is where this video comes in. 6 movies that I would give a second chance to prove me wrong. Now, sometimes a movie just isn't for you, and other times it might be who you watch the movie with, it might be external factors having an effect on why you didn't like the movie, and sometimes you just might not be in the right mindset for that movie. If you're new here, I go by Hordes and I post brand new videos here on Mondays and Fridays on my channel talking about all kinds of horror movies, and if it's something that you think that you could get behind, then feel free to stick around and subscribe. And if you have opinions on any of the movies that I'm about to mention, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. Now that I've done my niceties, let's talk about the 6 movies that I am going to give a second chance to. I was around 16 when I started to get into horror, and teenage Hordes would pretty much watch absolutely anything, and it turns out that that part has not changed, but it explains why everything on this list is from either 2003 all the way through to 2009. 2007 you are getting a double dose, and there is a particular movie from 2005 on here that has a lot of hype behind it, so I'm a little bit nervous to talk about that one, considering I definitely rated that one more of an rather than a meh. So how about we start with a movie that at the time I watched this, I disliked it, and would have even gone on record and said that it was my least favourite horror movie that I had ever watched. Creep is a 2004 horror mystery starring Frank Potent and Sean Harris. Set in the London Underground, Kate becomes trapped in an underground station. With no choice but to stay until morning, Kate soon finds things are much more frightening than being alone, as she heads into a labyrinth of tunnels underneath the city, pursued by an unknown attacker. I don't remember a single thing about Creep from 2004, besides the fact that I hated this movie so strongly for some reason. It is also the reason why it took me so long to watch Midnight Meat Train from 2008, because its posters are so similar. And I used to get the two of them confused, which I do not do now because Midnight Meat Train is actually a good movie. So am I kind of curious to find out why teenage me hated this movie so much? Yeah. The second movie on my list also happens to take place in a labyrinth of tunnels underneath the city. But rather than it being London, we're talking about the Paris catacombs. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this next movie, 16/17-year-old me watched this movie for one reason and one reason alone, and it wasn't the plot. This movie happens to star Alicia Moore, who is more famously known around the world as Pink. Catacombs is a 2007 horror thriller starring Sharon Sassamon and Pink. Victoria's sister Carolyn invites her to a rave in the Paris catacombs. Things take a turn for the worst when she gets separated from her group and begins to feel like something or someone is following her. When I first watched Catacombs, I had no idea that the Paris catacombs was actually a real thing. And if you do not know, underneath the city of Paris is a labyrinth of tunnels that contains the remains of 6 million people. 6 million. Like, that's insane. Now, you can actually visit these tunnels via guided tour, but it's only a very small section, and there is a huge part of it that is actually illegal to trespass in. And now that I know this, I feel like I'm going to have a different appreciation for this movie, because it's actually inspired by a real place that I didn't know was a real place at the time. Now, I know that it was filmed in Romania rather than in France, but if you are looking for a movie that was actually filmed in the Paris catacombs, check out the movie As Above, So Below, because these guys filmed their found footage style horror movie in the illegal closed off parts of the catacombs because they got permission from French authorities. This next movie doesn't actually have me to thank for it getting a rewatch. Now, Last year, at some point in summer, me and my girlfriend were talking about horror movies that we both really enjoy, and she asked me if I had seen this next movie, and was more surprised when I said I think it's just meh than anything else. And it's one of those movies where I think I just wasn't in the right mindset when I watched it, so if I enjoyed this next movie on a second rewatch, it has my girlfriend to thank for it. Daybreakers is a 2009 vampire action horror starring Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe, set in 2019 after an outbreak has turned 95% of the population into vampires. With supplies for human blood dwindling, a researcher working on finding an artificial blood supply that will meet society's needs works with a covert band of vampires on a way to save humankind. Daybreakers had one thing going against it. It was released in 2009 in the middle of the hysteria that was Twilight phenomenon, and I fell into the half of the world that absolutely hated and still hate the Twilight series. I've never been one to hate vampires before this phenomenon swept the world. Growing up, my favourite TV show was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I love the Underworld movies. I love Van Helsing. So for me, I feel like I should have liked Daybreakers, but at the time I was just so anti-vampire everything that I wasn't in the right mindset when I watched it, and I hated it because it was vampires, and that's not fair. Just this past week, I watched Stakeland from 2010, which is another vampire movie, but it also came out around the same time that the Walking Dead hype was everywhere. And now, when there isn't the two hypes anymore. Have you ever watched a movie and then years later have seen an image or seen a clip and have no recollection of what you're actually seeing? Because that is exactly how I am with this next movie, and I know 100% that I have seen this movie years ago because Eliza Dushku is in it, and at the time I wanted to watch anything that starred anybody from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's got cannibals in it. Wrong Turn is a 2003 horror thriller movie starring Elijah Dushku and Jeremy Sisto. Chris and a group of 5 friends are left stranded in the middle of the woods after their cars collide. As they venture deep into the woods, they find a cabin in the middle of nowhere where 3 inbred violent cannibals live, and their fight for survival begins. See, I knew there was cannibals in this movie, and I feel like I'm missing something with this movie because I don't remember a single thing about it. I love cannibal movies. In my DVD collection, I even have a section dedicated to cannibal movies, so I should remember watching Wrong Turn. But I don't, which is why I'm now intrigued to go back and watch it, because as we now know, there are multiple sequels to this movie and it became a full-blown franchise, so I feel like I'm now missing out on something. The first time ever Hordes has had FOMO when it comes to movies. So that's why I want to go back and watch Wrong Turn, because there is a reason that this movie was good enough to spawn this many sequels. We're talking 6 sequels, including a reboot. Slightly more niche with this next movie, and I kind of remember the basic plot of this being about a group of teens getting spaced out in a forest, and then it wasn't too long ago I found a picture of the villain in this movie and had no idea that they were actually from this movie. Your bad guy looks like a cross between Nosferatu and a goblin. I should remember that because that sounds pretty cool. Shrooms is a 2005 horror mystery starring Lindsay Horn and Jack Houston. A group of American students arrive in Ireland to get high on magic mushrooms. It is not long before they are left high and dry as a mysterious killer prowls the woods where they are camping. Could I care less about the getting high side of this plot? Absolutely not. But I feel like now I've seen the villain for this thing again, I have to go back and rewatch it to find out how the hell this thing goes with this story. Is it real? Is it hallucination? I have to know. I have to know what this weird, Baba Yaga, Nosferatu, goblin walking around like a Scooby-Doo sort of creeping villain. Like, I need to know like how this thing ties to getting spaced on mushrooms in a forest. The last movie on my list, if you haven't worked it out from the thumbnail, is a 2005 movie that carries a lot of hype behind it. And I can tell you exactly why I didn't like this movie first time watching it. Back then, and I still am to this day, I am a massive, massive fan of the Saw franchise. And this movie is often compared to the Saw franchise. And at the time, there was only love in my little horror heart for one big splatter sort of franchise, and it wasn't this one. Hostel is a 2005 splatter horror starring Jay Hernandez and Derek Richardson, and written and directed by Eli Roth. Josh and Paxton decide to spend the summer after college graduation backpacking across Europe. While stopping in Amsterdam, they meet Ollie, a like-minded traveller from Iceland. When the three set off to investigate enticing rumours of a Slovakian hostel, they find themselves drawn unwillingly into a deadly game. Back when I watched Hostel, one of my favourite horror movies, and it's still one of my favourite horror movies, is Saw 3. So I was looking for anything and everything that was remotely like the Saw franchise, and Hostel was a name that got thrown around a lot. So when I watched Hostel, and it was nothing like the Saw franchise besides being in the same splatter subgenre, I kind of wrote it off, and that isn't fair to Hostel because it's not Saw, it's its own thing. So now that I've matured and I've grown up and I've allowed myself to explore the splatter subgenre, which is one of my favourite subgenres, like the more gore, the better for me in a horror movie, I feel like now it is only fair to give Hostel the chance to be its own thing now, and it not be this movie that I wanted to be like a Saw movie that wasn't like a Saw movie. So this brings me on to the actual real reason for creating this video in the first place, and that is starting on Friday, roughly every 2-ish weeks, I'm going to be watching one of these 6 movies here on my channel to find out if they can now actually prove me wrong, and if any of my opinions will change on these movies. If you've seen any of these movies, I would love to know what your thoughts and opinions are down in the comment section down below. Do you love these movies? Do you hate them? Are they just meh for you too? I can't tell you what order I'm going to watch all 6 of these movies in yet, but I will be back on Friday watching Creep from 2004. I need to know why I hated this movie so much. So until next time, bye.